Right, we'll bring the jury in momentarily. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. We'll continue on with the state calling their next witness.
State calls Detective Brett Robertson. You solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Pull yourself up there. Thank you, sir. You may remove your mask if you're comfortable while you testify, and only one person talks at a time because she's taking it all down. All right.
Detective, can you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
Brett Robertson, Robertson.
And how are you employed?
Through the City of Oshkosh Police Department.
And are you a detective?
I am.
How long have you been employed in that capacity?
Total years as a law enforcement officer, detective for approximately 11 years.
I'd like to direct your attention to the events of August 4th, 2020. On that date, did you participate in the investigation of a shooting at 1715 Minnesota Street in the city of Oshkosh?
Yes, I did.
Where did you go when you were called in?
I initially responded to the police department and then I traveled to Mercy Medical Center.
And why did you go to Mercy?
One of the victims, Rebecca Borkowski, was being treated for injuries, and I was to speak with her as she was still able to talk, and that's what I did.
Rebecca cooperative in answering all of your questions at the hospital?
Yes, she was.
Did Rebecca ask you to check on anyone else unrelated to this case?
She did ask that we also check with Josh Aide's ex-wife. I believe her name is Samantha.
Was that safety check she was referring to?
That is correct.
While Rebecca was in the hospital, did she give officers consent to remain on her property and search her property?
She did.
Did she also give officers consent to search her vehicles?
Yes.
After talking to Rebecca, where did you go?
To 1715 Minnesota Street.
And while there, did you participate in a search of Rebecca's garage?
I did.
Can you describe that search?
It was a thorough search. We were trying to locate spent casings as well as bullets trajectory and to recover any extra bullet or bullet fragments as well. Also photographing thoroughly and just documenting where everything was and laid out.
And as part of that search, did you move all the items around that were in the garage so you could guarantee thoroughness?
Yes.
And can you just describe what you did in moving those items?
I started with photographs and video that I took of the scene in that area. And then we methodically just went through different areas, mainly specifically where it was reported that Rebecca was found, which was like on the passenger side of the Tahoe that was in the garage, and then just outside the garage, and then proceeded over towards the driver's side of the Tahoe, where we had methodically gone through items that were stacked up and just miscellaneous items in the garage just to determine if there were any bullet fragments, spent casings, or if we could even determine the trajectory or path of one of the rounds that was reportedly fired.
And how many officers participated in the search of the garage?
And remember Detective Fry, Detective Wilson, and myself, I believe, were the main three that searched that area.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibits 17 and 18.
Are you able to put them up?
Are those, well, can you just describe to the jury what that is?
Exhibit 17 is a photograph that depicts me in blue jeans and my black shoes. I took a photograph of a black in color Oshkosh Defense. I would describe it as like a reusable grocery bag and some contents that I had located inside. Exhibit 18 is a photograph of one of the contents that I located inside, which was a handgun magazine for Smith & Wesson that did have live rounds inside of it.
Okay, and that exhibit, or both those exhibits, I believe, have already been edited through the defense, but I would just ask to publish them. I believe the defense attorney has it on his computer. That you're referring to, and then the next exhibit.
You solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Pull yourself up there. Thank you, sir. You may remove your mask if you're comfortable while you testify, and only one person talks at a time because she's taking it all down. All right.
Detective, please state your name and spell your last name for the record, please.
Brett Robertson, Robertson.
And how are you employed?
through the City of Oshkosh Police Department.
And are you a detective?
I am
How long have you been employed in that capacity?
total 18 years as a law enforcement officer, detective for approximately 11 years.
I'd like to direct your attention to the events of August 4th, 2020. On that date, did you participate in the investigation of a shooting at 1715 Minnesota Street in the city of Oshkosh?
Yes, I did.
Where did you go when you were called in?
I initially responded to the police department and then I traveled to Mercy Medical Center.
And why did you go to Mercy?
One of the victims, Rebecca Borkowski, was being treated for injuries, and I was to speak with her as she was still able to talk, and that's what I did.
Was Rebecca cooperative in answering all of your questions at the hospital?
Yes, she was.
Did Rebecca ask you to check on anyone else unrelated to this case?
She did ask that we also check with Josh Aide's ex-wife. I believe her name is Samantha.
Was that safety check she was referring to?
That is correct.
While Rebecca was in the hospital, did she give officers consent to remain on her property and search her property?
She did.
Did she also give officers consent to search her vehicles?
Yes.
After talking to Rebecca, where did you go?
To 1715 Minnesota Street.
And while there, did you participate in a search of Rebecca's garage?
I did.
Can you describe that search?
It was a thorough search. We were trying to locate spent casings as well as bullets trajectory and to recover any extra bullet or bullet fragments as well. Also photographing thoroughly and just documenting where everything was and laid out.
And as part of that search, did you move all the items around that were in the garage so you could guarantee thoroughness?
Yes.
And can you just describe what you did in moving those items?
I started with photographs and video that I took of the scene in that area. And then we methodically just went through different areas, mainly specifically where it was reported that Rebecca was found, which was like on the passenger side of the Tahoe that was in the garage, and then just outside the garage, and then proceeded over towards the driver's side of the Tahoe, where we had methodically gone through items that were stacked up and just miscellaneous items in the garage just to determine if there were any bullet fragments, spent casings, or if we could even determine the trajectory or path of one of the rounds that was reportedly fired.
And how many officers participated in the search of the garage?
I remember Detective Fry, Detective Wilson, and myself, I believe, were the main three that searched that area.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibits 17 and 18.
Are you able to put them up?
Are those, well, can you just describe to the jury what that is?
Exhibit 17 is a photograph that depicts me in blue jeans, my black shoes. It's a photograph of a black in color Oshkosh Defense. I would describe it as like a reusable grocery bag, and some contents that I had located inside. Exhibit 18 is a photograph of one of the contents that I had located inside, which was a handgun magazine for Smith & Wesson that did have live rounds inside of it.
Okay, and that exhibit, or both those exhibits, I believe, have already been admitted to the defense, but I would just ask to publish them. I believe the defense attorney has it on his computer. the bag you're referring to, and then the next exhibit. And that would be the cartridge.
Those are the two exhibits that I'm describing. Yes.
Now, I would like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 48. Is that an overview of the scene that night?
It is.
Can you just describe where in the garage you would have located that Oshkosh defense bag?
If you look at, if you're facing the photograph, so on the right-hand side, you'll see a extension ladder.
Let me just stop you for a minute. Maybe if you use the mic, there should be a mic there. If you could just point to where you found it for the jury.
On the right-hand side of the garage where the extension ladder is, and this foam padding that is a weed whacker. I believe the bag was right in this general area, right in there.
And was it over items or under items, or do you recall how it was positioned in that area?
It was under items, like it had been covered. I had to remove items off it to locate it.
And did you find any guns in the garage that night?
No,
Looking at that exhibit again, can you describe for the jury, apart from the blood that's surrounding the deceased victim's head, where else on the driveway at Rebecca's yard did you locate any blood?
specifically, we had located blood, I believe somewhere down in this area. Located blood in this area. Located blood inside the garage, at the passenger side of the vehicle over in this area. Obviously where the deceased is.
Okay, and then in the garage, by the passenger side of the vehicle there, was that where the blood was contained to, or at any point did you see blood that led to the Oshkosh defense bag area?
It was contained to that area. I didn't see any blood that I remember leading towards or in this area at all.
And when you were pointing on the picture to the blood down toward the bottom of the picture, is that the west side of Rebecca's house?
It is.
And let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 56 and 57. Is that the blood droplet you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, I would just ask to publish that to the jury. And then the next one is a close-up, is that correct?
That is correct, by the garden most yes.
Okay. And in terms of entryways to Rebecca's house, are there any doors on that lower level of the west side of her house?
Not on the west side of the house, no.
And where is the nearest door?
It would be on the north side of the house.
Did you observe any blood droplets that would have led toward that door on the north side of the house?
No.
Did you also observe blood droplets or what appeared to be blood droplets in driveways to the south?
I did.
And did you take swabs of those blood droplets?
I did.
Did you also take swabs of the blood droplets there by the west side of Rebecca's house?
I did.
And the blood inside the garage, by the south side of the garage? Inside the garage.
Yes.
And did you take swabs from the blood droplet in the grass?
Yes.
And did you submit those swabs into evidence?
I did.
Did you subsequently collect a DNA sample from John Miller?
I did.
Was he cooperative in providing that to you?
Absolutely.
On August 5th, the day after the incident, did you speak with Rebecca Borkowski?
Yes.
As part of that meeting, did you discuss guns that she owned?
I did.
Was Rebecca forthcoming in discussing the firearms she owned?
Yes.
As part of that discussion, did she, on the 5th, did she mention that she owned a 380?
She did.
And was she cooperative in answering all of your questions that day?
Yes.
Did you also speak with her again on August 11th?
Yes.
Did she also make reference to her 380 on that day?
She did.
I'd like to talk to you about August 14th, 2020. Did you return to Rebecca's residence that day?
We did.
Why did you go there?
We were still trying to determine bullet travel direction from the victim, John Miller. And so I wanted to search the neighboring residences, the sidewalls of those homes, and it was daylight, and just to see if there a bullet had struck, adjacent house, or maybe even Rebecca's home or garage, and we had missed it.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 64 through 67. Do those appear to be photos that you would have taken when you returned to Rebecca's residence that day?
Yes.
And I would move to admit State's Exhibit 64 through 67 into evidence and be published to the jury as they go through them.
Any objection? No objection. Accept and receive the exhibits.
That exhibit there, State's Exhibit 64, can you just describe what that is, how that's relevant?
That image is of State Exhibit 65.
Do you mind if I grab those that I just gave you just to see on the label?
All right, that State's Exhibit 64 there?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Can you describe the relevance?
Specifically, if you look to the left of the blue garbage can, you'll see there is I believe it's my ruler, some tools and a leather out. But in that area, in the concrete control joint that runs north and south, is where I located a prestige jacket of a bullet that had gone down and was probably 3 or 4 inches down in the concrete in the driveway.
And can you just describe for the jury what a jacket is?
In most handgun rounds, or any round for a regular handgun, you have a jacket, which is normally it could be a copper or brass coating on the outside that covers a lead projectile or a design bullet that's within the jacket. So basically a covering that is over another piece of metal.
Okay, and moving on to exhibit 65. And is that just a closer up of the scene that you're talking about there?
It is. It's detected hanky in the photograph, and by the ruler is the exact area where that piece of jacket was located down in the concrete control joint.
And moving on to 66. Can you describe that as?
That is the jacket from the round that was right next to the control joint in that area where I found it. Maybe 8 inches or so off the foundation of the residence.
And so when you found it, was it in that joint there?
It was down towards basically the ground underneath the driveway concrete slab.
And what did you need to do to get it out? Was it pretty far in?
It was, we used, as you can see in the photographs, pieces of coat hanger. We tried scissors and we're able to just finagle it out a little bit.
Okay. And moving on to exhibit 67. Is that just a close-up of the jacket you were referencing?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you collect that item as evidence?
Yes,
And did you turn it into the Oshkosh Police Department evidence room?
yes.
In early September of 2020, did Rebecca contact you regarding return of her guns?
She did.
And was that seeking return of the guns that were collected in the warrant that was done in her house?
Yes.
And can you just describe what you told her at that point?
I would have to check with the DA's office before returning any of the guns. We had collected those to make sure that they were involved in this incident in any way. And she had brought forward that we had not located the .380 handgun.
So she brought that to your attention?
Yes,
And that's the 380 she was discussing with you the day after the shooting incident?
yes.
And did she voluntarily turn that over to officers?
Later she did, I believe she turned it over to Detective Artis.
As part of your role in this case, did you do a download of any cell phones?
I did, yes.
And whose cell phone did you download?
Rebecca's cell phone, the victim James Gruntner, and John Miller's.
And what program do you use to do those downloads?
The program is called Celebrate, the Celebrate data extraction tool.
And can you just briefly describe what it's able to do?
The tool is able to extract data off your cellular device to include calls, text messages, instant messages, Facebook messages, certain apps like WhatsApp, etc., images, videos, notes that you might have on your phone, emails. Basically, it can gather a lot of information off the device, location information, etc.
And does that generate a written report?
I generate that report, yes, the program allows you to do that, yeah.
And did you make that report available to an analyst with the Oshkosh Police Department, Victoria Heidemann?
Yes.
While you were investigating this case, when you returned on August 5th, did you use your cell phone to record the scene of the crime?
Yes, I believe it was a video that had been taken.
I'd like to just play that to give the jury a more thorough picture of the scene. And as we go through, I'll stop and ask you just a couple questions. This is on thumb drive exhibit 7. This will be 7K. I'm playing from the beginning to 35 seconds. that stop there is at the scene we were just viewing in the concrete where the jacket was located.
Yes.
Now moving on, I'm gonna, continue from 35 seconds to 1 minute, 26 seconds. Would that be a view from someone standing just outside the garage looking toward that scene there?
Yes.
As part of this case, did you have a chance to look at a map John Miller had drawn regarding his path of travel when he ran from the defendant?
I can't honestly say if I reviewed John Miller's map. But I believe I've been told, the area in which he believes he ran.
You can move on from 1 minute, 26 seconds to 1 minute, 59 seconds. Can you just describe the significance of that corner there?
That is where, we had located, John's shoe, I believe it was. And, there was a broken, flower pot, I believe, we just saw.
Now moving on from there through 234. Are all of those blood droplets in the driveway at 1719, the house just to the south of Rebecca's?
Yes.
And now if we can just move on to the end. And the end of the video is at 4:18. Those spots that you're pointing out, are those suspected blood droplets?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Ross?
Thank you. Detective Robertson, now those blood droplets that we were just looking at in the video, there's no type of what I call, or you can call a cast-off analysis that can be done with those, correct?
No.
And by that, I mean that there's no way to determine which direction any person was moving when those blood droplets came in contact with the spot, correct?
No.
Now, you testified that at one point, Rebecca had called you asking to see if she could get her guns back, correct?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
I believe it was September 3rd.
And you had told her essentially, no, you couldn't give them back, correct?
Correct.
And only after then you told her no, then she volunteered to you that she had another one, correct?
I don't know exactly how the conversation started. I believe it was more towards, there had been another one that had been found and that prompted my phone call to her. And it was, part of that phone call was that she also wanted to know if she could get her guns back for dad or for own self-defense.
Did you do a supplement to this report about this?
Yes.
So you don't know now the order that it went, whether she asked for her gun back first, and then after you told her no, she volunteered for another gun?
I don't know specifically how the conversation had started, but it was a mix of basically both of those parts of the conversation.
Now, regarding that bullet jacket that was located in the cement crack, what day did you locate that?
I believe it was August 14th.
And that was after the cement had already been cleaned, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
We saw the blood from the video, all that was gone, right?
I believe so.
And you located that bullet jacket, I think you said it was approximately 3-4 inches down in that crack.
I'd say it was approximately 8 inches or so away from the foundation, maybe 3 to 4 inches deep in the crack.
And when you conducted the search that night of August 4th, you did locate that jacket, correct?
I did not know.
And it's metallic, so that's something you'd expect to shine off a flashlight, right?
Yes, sir.
And with your knowledge of firearms, and specifically your testimony that that jacket is something that would have encased another metal component of a projectile, would you say it's fairly impossible that that jacket that you found had just managed to fall right inside of that crack?
I couldn't necessarily say that it fit down there. I do know the night of, I looked up it pretty extensively and didn't see that jacket. And I do recall also moving those garbage cans that night and stuff as well around the perimeter and didn't locate it.
So you're fairly confident that that jacket was not there the night of August 4th?
I wouldn't say not there as wasn't on the scene. I just didn't observe it or find it in that control joint crack that night. And I can also say that I didn't look in that control joint the night of August 4th.
You went over the area with your flashlight though, right?
Yes.
And as previously testified to your knowledge, that cement had all, that driveway had all been cleaned, somehow scrubbed down free of the blood, correct?
I don't know if it was done professionally, I believe it was, but I think it was clean.
And now you testified on the night of August 4th. When you returned to the scene, you took part in the searching of the garage, correct?
Yes,
And you did that with detectives Fry and Wilson, correct?
yes,
And Detective Fry and Wilson had also searched the house, correct?
yes.
But you didn't take part in the search of the house.
I was in the house and I do remember searching certain areas, assisting with evidence packaging.
What areas of the house did you search?
I remember specifically being upstairs in the, I would say, office room, bedroom, that upstairs area.
Who else was searching upstairs?
I believe Sergeant Nelson was.
Who was searching downstairs, that you recall?
I don't recall specifically, possibly Detective Ang.
And did you see the other detectives and officers while you were searching, also conducting their search?
Yes, yes,
And did it appear based upon your observations of the other officers searching the house that you were doing they were doing a meticulous search of the house?
I would say we were searching the house. I don't necessarily know if I'd use the word meticulous, but we were trying to do a thorough search of the house, yes.
You used the word meticulous twice when you searched the garage, correct?
We did.
And you searched that as thoroughly as you searched the house?
I would say no.
You searched the house more thoroughly?
I would say search the garage more thoroughly.
That the house of the search was thorough as well, based upon your observations, correct?
It was thorough. We just didn't manipulate and move a lot of the property around, or at least I didn't, as we partook in the garage.
And in the garage, you found the bag identified by defense exhibit number 17, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you found that bag, you opened it, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it's common when officers during conducting the search, be it of a house, a garage, or anything, when they come across a bag, you look inside of it, fair to say?
Fair to say yes.
And that's what you did with the Oshkosh defense bag, correct?
Yes,
And inside of it, you found the magazine identified in defense exhibit number 18, correct?
correct.
If I could please have number 18 published. And that's a Smith and Wesson magazine, correct?
Yes,
And particularly 380 caliber Smith and Wesson.
yes,
And there's one bullet that appears to be missing from the magazine, correct?
it appears so.
And that's, you can tell that because of the red mark by number 6, correct?
Yes,
That would suggest that the handgun it belongs to had a bullet in the chamber. Would that be fair to say?
I wouldn't say necessarily. It potentially could. Yes, I also know that I believe there was a loose round that I found in that bag as well. I don't believe it's in this exhibit 17.
Wasn't that loose round that you found in the bag, a 9mm?
It could be. I'd have to review either the report or the evidence log.
Do you recall finding a 9mm round as well?
If it is in my report as a 9mm, it would be correct. I can't remember offhand if it was 380 or if it was a 9mm.
May I approach, Your Honor? Detective, I'm showing you, or providing you what's been pre-marked as defense exhibit number 16. Can you identify what that is?
That is a supplement, 9 pages in length, written by myself, dated August 4th, 2020.
And I'd ask you to turn to page 4 of 9
I'm there.
and the second paragraph. I'd ask that you review that, and then once you're done, let me know, and I'm gonna ask if that reflects your recollection.
I reviewed it, it does.
And Detective Robertson, from the opportunity that you had to see defense exhibit number 16, did it appear to be an accurate copy of your police report in this case?
Yes.
I move exhibit 16 in evidence.
I think it was just used to refresh recollections. I don't know that it needs to be moved into evidence.
It won't be accepted at this point.
And after reviewing the second paragraph on page 4, do you recall now what you located inside that bag?
It was a loose 9mm round and a magazine with usually 5 380 rounds in the magazine.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but with the semi-automatic pistol, that the magazine such as this would belong to, when you insert the magazine and then pull the slide back, that takes a bullet from the magazine and puts it in the barrel, correct?
Mr. Seaman, move up towards the light.
I already asked the question, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you load a magazine into a semi-automatic pistol, like a Smith & Wesson 380, and then you pull the slide back, that takes a bullet from the magazine and puts it in the barrel, correct?
That is correct. Your chain ring all around.
And you later spoke with Rebecca regarding this bag that you had found, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, she had told you that this was a bag that she kept in her vehicle, correct?
It was a bag that she utilized to move contents out of one vehicle to another.
And so the contents of that bag contained items that she had kept in her vehicle, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
Any regret?
Just briefly, so the cartridge that Mr. Seaman was talking about, which with one round that appeared not in it, you really have no idea where that round was or anything about it, do you?
Other than what she told me that it was from contents from her vehicle, from moving from one vehicle to the other, no.
Sure, but regarding the one bullet that Mr. Seaman noted was not in that cartridge, do you have any idea about the status of where that bullet is or anything to do with it?
No.
And you testified that that bag was on the opposite side of the garage as where Rebecca was located, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there any, well, let me back up. Based on your understanding of Rebecca's injuries, would you expect to see some blood droplets or some sort of evidence that she had made her way across the garage? Had she done that?
Yes.
And did you see any evidence of blood droplets leading to where you found the bag on the completely other side of the garage under a bunch of boxes?
No, I did not.
And when you were searching in the house, did you see any evidence of blood droplets in Rebecca's house anywhere?
No, I did not.
Was there any indication that either John or Rebecca had entered Rebecca's house that night?
No.
No further questions.
Amy Cross?
No.
You may step down.
Thank you, Ron.
Take the call the next witness.
State House Detective Jeremy Wilson.
you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Pull yourself right up to the mic. You may take your mask off if you want while you testify, if you're comfortable, and only one person talks at a time. She gets it done. Okay.
Here's that.
Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
My name is Jeremy Wilson, Wilson.
How are you employed?
I'm a detective with the City of Oshkosh Police Department.
And how long have you been employed in that capacity?
I've been with the City of Oshkosh for a little over 16 total years. I've been a detective for 8.5 of those years.
I'd like to direct your attention to the events of August 4th, 2020. On that date, did you participate in the investigation of a shooting at 1715 Minnesota Street in the city of Oshkosh?
Yes,
Is that in Winnebago County, Wisconsin?
correct.
And what was your understanding of the situation when you became involved?
When I became involved, the scene was secure at the residence, and we were looking for the alleged shooter. So when I got in, everybody some of the victims were in hospitals. There was one victim that had passed away, was still on the scene. And then I worked on trying to locate Joshua Aide.
And what did you do specifically to try to locate him?
I did a emergency ping request through T-Mobile.
Can you describe what a ping request is for the jury?
Ping request is when we request information specifically on the location of a phone. So they're able to provide us the location of a phone, T-Mobile, every 15 minutes in this case. And then depending on the ping, how close of an area they're able to give us where that phone is located.
And when you were doing this ping request, were you also working with a woman, a crime analyst at the police department named Victoria Heidemann in mapping these pings?
Yes, I was.
And how does that work?
She has a program, Cellhawk, I believe it's called, where she's able to map those on a computer to show the progress of those pings. I think the mapping actually occurred at a different time or a later time.
And that night, when you were trying to locate the defendant, what did the pings tell you?
The pings show us travel eventually towards in his final location back at his residence in Greene County.
On August 5th, did you travel to Greene County Impound Garage?
I did with Detective Dean Ernest.
And what was your purpose of going there?
Detective Dean Ernest had obtained a search warrant to search the red Toyota RAV4 that was driven by Joshua Aide back to his residence.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 68 through 70. I'm sorry, through 71.
I think you already have some.
Thank you.
Do those appear to be photographs related to your search of his vehicle?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, I believe 71's already been admitted, but I would move to admit State's Exhibits 68 through 70 and publish 68 through 71 to the jury.
Any objection? No, sir. After receiving the exhibits, you may publish that.
Is that the defendant's vehicle?
Yes, it is.
And moving on to 79, or 69, I'm sorry.
Away from your mic.
Can you describe, as we're going through these, what you found in the vehicle?
So, excuse me, so I primarily searched the passenger side of the vehicle. This would be the, on State Exhibit 69, that was how the front seat of the vehicle looked before we searched that vehicle. Detective Artis had taken pictures prior to us actually starting the search of that vehicle.
And moving on to State's Exhibit 70. What is that showing?
This was after the search had started, where it had located a Taurus 45 caliber revolver. That's where it was located, on the floor where the picture was taken.
Okay. And moving on to Exhibit 71. Is that just a closer up view of that revolver?
Yes, it is.
And just to be clear, is that a second gun? Let me back up. You're aware that a .380 was located on the defendant when he was taken into custody in Greene County, correct?
Correct.
So this was an additional gun that was located in his car when it was impounded?
Correct.
And are you aware of whether that firearm was loaded?
It was loaded. We removed the rounds to make it safe prior to transporting it.
And was that something you were able to see just by looking at it?
You can see when you handle it from the back end, that there was rounds in the revolver, yes.
Okay, and if we just zoom in on that for you. Can you tell from looking at that there whether it's loaded?
Without removing the rounds, I can tell that there are casings in there. Obviously, I didn't know they were used or unused until I removed them out of the gun. They were unused rounds, so the gun was loaded and ready to be shot.
What else did you locate in the vehicle of significance?
There was some mail that had Joshua Aide's name on it. We also located an open bottle of beer in the center console in exhibit numbers. The state exhibit 69, you can see there's 2 unopened bush lights in the door.
Sure, if we could just move back to that.
It's shown in both state exhibit 69 and 70, those 2 cans in that passenger door were identified as bush light.
As part of this case, did you do a download of a phone owned by the defendant?
Yes, I did.
And is that something that generates a report?
Yes.
And did you make that report available to an analyst with the Oshkosh Police Department, Victoria Heidemann?
Yes, I did.
No further questions.
Any cross?
Yes, sir. Now, Detective Wilson, you just testified that regarding that Taurus Judge, that there was no way to tell if it was actually loaded unless you removed the cylinder or checked the rounds, correct?
Correct. I have to know if the rounds were shot before, or if they were just empty casings, or if they were regular rounds unused.
Or it'd be an unsafe practice, but if you look down the front of it, you'd be able to see if it was loaded, potentially because you'd be able to see if there were live projectiles, right?
Correct.
And regarding exhibit number 69, if we could have that one back, please. You testified that in the center console there, that was a partially drank bottle of beer?
I don't recall if it was partially drank or how much was left in there. It was just an open container of alcohol, and again, I don't remember how much was in there.
No further questions, thank you.
Nothing further.
Any step up? On the next witness.
State calls Detective Dean Artis.
solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Only one person talks at a time, and if you want, you may keep your mask off if you're comfortable while you're just.
Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
Dean Artis, Artus.
How are you employed?
I'm a detective with the City of Oshkosh Police Department,
And how long have you been employed in that capacity?
just over 29 years.
I'd like to direct your attention to August 4th, 2020. On that date, did you participate in the investigation of a shooting at 1715 Minnesota Street in the city of Oshkosh?
I did.
And what was your understanding of the situation when you first became involved?
I responded to the scene initially, and there had been 2 victims that had been transported to local hospitals from the scene upon my arrival, and there was 1 victim still on scene that had been declared deceased.
Are you aware of what time the 911 call came in for that incident?
It was 8:27 p.m.
And were you lead detective in this case?
I was.
Where did you go when you were first called in? Did you go right to the scene?
Yes.
And what happened next?
Once I arrived on scene, I instructed the officers on scene to secure the scene and basically back out, get the perimeter set. I got some basic information from the officers and what had transpired. At that point, I returned to the police department to write a search warrant to process the scene.
And were you aware when you wrote the search warrant whether the homeowner, Rebecca Borkowski, had consented to a search of her home?
Yes, I was aware of that.
That she had consented?
Yes, I believe she had given officers consent.
And what happened after that?
I prepared the affidavit for the search warrant, and eventually the search warrant was signed at approximately 12:05 a.m.
And then what happened after that was signed?
I produced the search warrant to the detectives on scene, and they processed the scene.
Did you have any role further in processing the scene?
I did not.
And why is that?
At approximately 11:37 p.m., I was contacted, or Oshkosh Police was contacted, that Greene County Sheriff's Department had taken Joshua Aide in custody in their jurisdiction.
Where did you go upon learning that?
Upon learning that, myself and Detective Pinky traveled to the City of Oregon Police Department, where we took custody of Mr. Aide.
And I'm sorry, where was Mr. Aide taken by Greene County deputies?
The City of Oregon, Wisconsin Police Department.
So that's where you traveled to that night?
Correct.
And did anyone travel with you?
Detective Pinky.
Did Greene County deputies turn over some items of evidence to you?
Yes, it did.
And what was that?
Deputy Mayor from Greene County Sheriff's Department turned over to me a firearm with a holster that was loaded, along with a second loaded magazine for a gun, as well as his Samsung Galaxy S8 cell phone and wallet and its contents, and I believe there were some headphones as well.
I've handed you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 72. Is that a box containing the items that you just described?
This box contains the .380 Ruger pistol with the
cloth holster and the magazine that was in the gun.
I would ask to move State's Exhibit 72 into evidence and to allow the detective to open the box and walk around to show the jury the firearm.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right. That's what she's Exhibit 72.
And can you describe again the make and model of the firearm?
Yes, it is a Ruger LCP 380 caliber pistol.
And is there a red laser affixed to it?
Yes,
Did you make contact with the defendant Joshua Aide that day?
I did.
And that was at the Oregon Police Department?
Yes,
Do you see Joshua Aide in the courtroom today?
yes.
Can you identify him by what he's wearing?
He's seated at the defense table, gray suit, blue shirt, wearing glasses.
The individual two to my left?
That's correct.
And I would just ask that the record reflect the witness as identified the defendant.
Good job.
How did he appear to you when you made contact with him?
He appeared intoxicated to me.
And what was notable about his appearance or demeanor that made you believe he was intoxicated?
He had bloodshot eyes. He was fairly unstable with his walk. And later I could smell alcohol as well.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 73 through 80. Would those be pictures of the defendant as he appeared to you when you made contact with him that night?
Yes,
Now, I'm just going to scroll through the pictures and then excuse me. Your Honor, I would just ask that State's Exhibit 73 through 80 be moved into evidence and to publish them electronically to the jury.
Any objection?
No objection.
Is that a full view of the defendant as he appeared that night in State's Exhibit 73?
yes,
We can just move on to 74. A little closer review,
yes,
and 75.
yes.
That's his face.
Patient, yes.
76,
Back, yes.
77,
Top of hands, yes.
78,
Palms of his hands,
79,
shoe,
and 80.
another shoe.
Did you observe any injuries to the defendant?
I did not.
Can you describe any conversation you had with him?
I attempted to interview him, and he did not wish to give a statement about what happened. I asked him if he was injured in any way. He stated he was not. He was acted confused as to why he was in custody and what he had been arrested for. When I informed him he was arrested for homicide, he asked who he supposedly had killed.
And did you record that conversation with him?
I did.
of that conversation. This is on the thumb drive, State's Exhibit 7, and this one will be 7L. And I'll be playing it.
Yes, sir. I would see the proof of that. Okay, you're welcome. You got your one? Yeah, because that didn't happen. Okay.
It's a little grainy audio, but is that the defendant saying to you that that didn't happen?
Yes.
I'd like to move on to 8:57 to 9:32.
I literally rolled into my driveway and there were like 14 police officers there that couldn't tell me what they were charging me with.
Yeah, well, that's what you're being charged with. For intentional murder.
Murder of who?
I think you know.
No, I don't. Yeah, you do.
Can you stand up, please, sir?
And moving on to 11 to 11:10.
In any way from say like crime injuries. No, stuff from military stuff.
No.
Okay, good night.
Was that him denying to you that he had any injuries?
Yes.
And moving on to 12:45 to 13:14.
All that up when you get your criminal complaint in a day or two.
Okay, that's from me on who?
Right. Well, I'm not gonna give you the privilege or the pleasure to know who you killed, okay? One of the 3 people you shot tonight, how's that?
Who I
You
get.
get 2 counts of attempted murder, so 2 of your 3 witnesses. There you go.
Who I killed.
Come on.
Yeah.
Detective Artis, throughout your entire time with the defendant at the Oregon Police Department, did he continue denying any knowledge of a shooting or why you were there?
Yes.
Where did you take him from the Oregon Police Department?
From the Oregon Police Department, we traveled back to Oshkosh and he was booked in the Winnebago County Jail.
And did he make any comments on the drive home?
None.
Was he awake or asleep during the drive back?
I would say he probably slept some. He was awake. He did make like small talk every now and then, but nothing of substance to this case.
At any point, did he indicate to you that he had any injuries from that night?
Never.
At any point, did he indicate to you that he was the victim of a crime?
Never.
As part of your investigation, did you meet with a man named Scott Balthazar?
I spoke to him over the phone, yes.
And who is he in relation to Joshua Aide?
He is a friend of Joshua's from the military.
And Did you speak with him about what had happened on August 4th, 2020?
Yes,
Did he send you screenshots of Facebook Messenger comments Joshua had made to him about Rebecca on August 4th, 2020?
yes, he did.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 81. Are those screenshots of those Facebook Messenger, of the Facebook Messenger exchange between Joshua and Mr. Balthazar?
Yes, it is.
And can you tell the jury the time on August 4th that that first message was sent by Joshua Aide to Mr. Balthazar?
Yes, 4:34 p.m.
Can you just read that first message that Joshua has sent?
Well, I'm going to object, Your Honor, to the exhibit. The foundation is based off hearsay and insufficient.
I can lay some more foundation.
Go ahead.
Was, so you indicated Mr. Balthazar was aware that you were interviewing him about what happened on August 4th?
Yes,
And as part of your investigation, have you had a chance to review a Facebook Messenger exchange that Rebecca had allowed officers access to between her and the defendant?
yes, I was.
And when Mr. Balthazar provided you screenshots, did you have a chance to compare the photo of the individual identified as Joshua on the Balthazar messages to the photo identified as Joshua on the messages with Rebecca?
Yes, I did.
Does it appear to be the same Facebook profile picture?
It is the same profile picture.
Your Honor, I would ask that it be moved into evidence.
Objection?
No objection.
Then receive the exhibits.
Can you just, let me back up. Can you read the time that Joshua sent that message to Mr. Balthazar?
It was August 4th at 4:34 p.m.
And what is that first message that the defendant sent to him?
That message reads, quote, "Becky is really pissing me off right now, saying she is leaving everything at the road," unquote.
As part of your investigation, did you listen to jail calls made by the defendant from the Winnebago County Jail?
Yes, I did.
Can you just describe to the jury how the jail call system works?
Yes, when you're being housed in the jail, you have a inmate identification number. You can log into the phone and make phone calls outside of the jail. All phone calls going out of the jail are recorded, and you can research by inmate name for all phone calls that an inmate has made.
Did you have a chance to listen to a call made by the defendant on August 12th, 2020, to an individual with a, to a phone number associated with a lead? 2000. And in that call, does Joshua Aide still seem to be focused on the Tahoe?
Yes, the Tahoe and other property that they were planning to exchange before the shooting.
I'd like to just play for you a portion of that call. This is the 7M jail call for Lee Hogendorf, 8/12/2020, 6:08 to 6:49. 6:08 to 6:49.
Did you drive behind the barn and see if those rims and tires were there?
Yeah, I did. I was surprised to see those laying there.
Okay, that means she hasn't been out there yet. Okay,
Is somebody supposed to take those, or you need those locked up?
No, she's supposed to deliver all my shit and take those, which means she hasn't delivered any of my stuff.
Okay.
Because I should still be getting the taco back. I played my stuff from Afghanistan back, but really what I wanted was a taco and my stuff from Afghanistan. She can keep the rest.
Yeah.
In that same call, does he also make a statement related to officers recovering the gun he'd used?
Yes.
I just played for you the same call from 11:40 to 12:15.
Did they give you my pistol back? No. Okay, you might want to call and ask them what happened to that stuff, because there was a Taurus Judge revolver in there too.
Is that what you used?
No.
Oh. Okay.
So.
Whatever you use is evidence, they will keep that.
Yeah, that better have it.
The Taurus revolver that he's referring to, is that a firearm that was located in his vehicle during the search?
Yes, it was on the passenger floorboard area.
On September 10th, 2020, did you meet with Rebecca at the Oshkosh Police Department?
Yes, I did.
And why did you meet with her?
On that date, she had turned over to me her .380 caliber handgun that was missed in the residence during the search the night of the incident.
Okay. And did she turn that over to you voluntarily?
Yes, she did.
On September 14th, 2020, did you also talk with a woman named Sharon Morgano?
Yes, I did.
And did she provide you information about that firearm that Rebecca turned over?
Yes, she provided a statement regarding how she found that firearm.
And did she provide that statement voluntarily?
Yes, she did.
As part of the investigation, did you submit evidence in this case to the crime lab?
Yes.
I'd like to talk to you first about evidence you submitted for ballistics testing. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 82 and 83. Can you describe what those exhibits are?
Yes, Exhibit 82 is Oshkosh Police Department property forms for 3 shell casings, the .380 Ruger LCP pistol with the cloth holster and magazine recovered from Joshua Aide, the sealed cardboard box containing a suspected bullet, along with the transmittal form to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab for those items to be tested by the firearms examiner. Other items also included metal jacket and possible bullet from the driveway at 1715 Minnesota, and that transmittal, a bullet recovered from Rebecca Borkowski, and the transmittal for that item as well to the crime lab for testing. Exhibit 83 is a receipt from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab for all of those items that were transmitted for testing.
And so just to be clear, you submitted the 3 casings, the jacket found in the concrete seam, the bullet from Rebecca's head, the bullet from James Bruckner's head, as well as the firearm, the Ruger 380 recovered from the defendant.
That's correct.
Can I hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 84? Can you describe what that is?
This is the Wisconsin State Crime Lab report regarding the examination of all those items that were submitted for firearm testing.
And what were the findings?
The findings were that the 3 shell casings that were submitted and recovered at 1715 Minnesota Street were fired by the Ruger 380 recovered from Joshua Aide. The 2 fired projectiles were fired in and through the barrel of item B, the Ruger pistol recovered from Joshua Aide.
So the 2 projectiles, are you referring to the bullet in Rebecca's head and the bullet recovered from James Bruckner's head?
That's correct. And then there's a separate report concerning the metal jacket. And that was also determined to have been fired through the barrel of the Ruger pistol as well.
I would move to admit State's Exhibits 82, 83, and 84 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
Accept and receive the exhibits.
Was suspected blood evidence also submitted by you to the crime lab for DNA testing?
Yes, it was.
And was that swabs of blood from the scene sent to the crime lab?
Yes,
And in conjunction with that, were DNA swabs from both Rebecca and John sent to the crime lab for comparison?
yes, as well as James.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 85 and 86. Can you just describe for the jury what those 2 documents are?
Yes, State's Exhibit 85 is a transmittal form that I filled out regarding the blood and DNA evidence that I had submitted to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. State's Exhibit 86 is the receipt from the crime lab documenting how they marked those items when they received them.
And does the transmittal indicate that blood sent included suspected blood from the grass by Rebecca's driveway, suspected blood from the area of James Bruckner, suspected blood from garage near the south wall, suspected blood from 1719 driveway, suspected blood from 1727 driveway, suspected blood from 1715 marker C? Are those all included?
Yes,
And it also indicates that there were buccal swabs from both Rebecca and John, and a DNA card from James.
yes.
Can I show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 87?
with that is?
This is the Wisconsin State Crime Lab report on the DNA analysis and their findings.
And regarding items H, the blood swab from the grass by Rebecca's driveway, and item M, the blood from Rebecca's driveway, 1715, who did that return to?
Those all returned to John Miller.
And then moving on to the blood found at 1719 and 1727. Items K and L, who did that? Oh, let me back up. The blood swabs from those driveways at those addresses, who did that return to?
Those also identified John Miller as the source of that blood.
And regarding item J, the blood near the south wall of Rebecca's garage, who did that return to?
That identified Rebecca Borkowski as the source of that blood.
State would move exhibits 85, 86, and 87 into evidence.
Any objection? No objection. Nothing this evening.
Now, as this case moved on, did you have an opportunity to listen to a jail call, a portion of a jail call from September 10th, 2020 between the defendant and a man named Lee Hogendorf?
Yes.
In that call, were you concerned that the defendant was asking Lee to make up a story about Rebecca?
Yes.
I'd like to play for you a portion of that call. This will be on the thumb drive labeled exhibit 7, and this would be 7N. This is jail call to Lee Hogendorf, September 10th, 2020, playing 12:10 to 12:20.
No, I agree, but like I said, with that, going to listen at me, you're gonna have to make that story sound good, like you saw the whole thing.
So he's saying, like I said, with that pointing a weapon at me, you're going to have to make that story sound good, like you saw the whole thing.
Yes.
And he starts that out by saying, like I said. You listened to previous jail calls to this, right?
Yes, I did.
All previous jail calls to this?
If not all, just about every single one, yes.
Do you recall the parties speaking about any incident of Rebecca pointing a weapon at the defendant?
No.
Are you aware of whether Joshua Aide was communicating with Lee Hogendorf by letter?
Yes, he was indicating many times in his phone calls that letters were going out to Lee. He would be sending him multiple letters per week.
And did this Lee ever make a report to you or any of the officers of the Oshkosh Police Department about a story about Rebecca pointing a firearm at him?
No, he did not.
And subsequent to this call, did it appear that the defendant was talking to Lee further about coordinating this story?
Yes.
And what was the context of that?
Just
more conversation about, Rebecca and, their relationship and,
Let me ask
not
you,
getting along well.
let me ask you a different question. Did it sound as though there were investigators that the defendant was instructing Lee to make a report to?
Yes.
Were those investigators employees of your department?
No, my understanding is they were, defense investigators that he was giving the statement to.
And were there, subsequent to this call that we just heard about making the story about Rebecca sound good, were there conversations about making a report to those investigators?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Detective Artist, now, would it be fair to summarize your role in the investigation as the lead investigator?
Yes.
And after you had drafted the search warrant for Rebecca's residence, then you had Detective Fry execute that? Was he the one in charge of executing that?
He was one of many detectives that were on scene at the residence to conduct that search warrant.
Detective Fry is the one that brought the crime scene vehicle, correct?
I believe that was brought out shortly after this incident happened. When I arrived on scene, I had coordinated with Detective Hankey to follow one of the victims to Theta Clark Hospital, Detective Robertson to accompany Rebecca Borkowski. Detective Fry was to handle the scene, so he brought the crime scene van out. I was in charge of the search warrant, and I had Detective Wilson and Detective Bang at the police department coordinating with other jurisdictions to attempt to take Mr. Aide into custody.
So Detective Fry was to handle the scene, correct? That's how you summarize it, or his role?
At the beginning of the investigation, yes, and then once other people freed up, the search warrant was completed and several of them handled it then.
And then you traveled down to Oregon Police Department to take custody of Joshua Aide, correct?
Yes.
And we heard some recordings regarding your interaction with Mr. Aide at the police department, correct?
Yes.
And he disagreed with you when you had told him that he had murdered someone, correct?
Yes.
And I believe twice you had characterized it by telling Josh that he was being taken into custody for murdering someone, and he disagreed with that both times, correct?
Yes.
And then we heard another snippet of that recording where you told Josh that you weren't going to give him the privilege or pleasure of knowing who he had killed, correct?
Yes.
And before that, though, do you recall you told Josh that he was being charged with 1 count of first-degree intentional homicide and 2 counts of attempted homicide? Do you recall telling Josh that?
Yes.
And you told him that he would be getting a complaint and he could figure it all out in court. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And it was after that that he made denials about the term that we heard disagreeing with you that he killed someone after you said it was in relation to what you told him he was being charged with, correct?
No, he had already several times prior to that with Greene County as well indicated he had no idea why he was in custody or what was going on.
But with you, he disagreed with the term when you were telling him that he had murdered somebody, correct?
I would consider his denial to me was that he had no idea why he was in custody. It wasn't because of the term kill.
But you did tell him that he was being charged with first-degree intentional homicide and 2 counts of attempted first-degree homicide, correct?
That is correct.
Now, you testified that you met with Rebecca on September 10th, correct?
Yes,
And at that meeting, she turned over to you her 380 pistol, correct?
yes,
And you termed it that it was the pistol, quote, that was missed during the search, end quote.
yes,
And you based that opinion that it was missed during the search because of what Rebecca told you, correct?
Rebecca's aunt as well, yes.
And you didn't ask, really, you didn't question that at all when Rebecca's aunt and Rebecca told you that this pistol was missed during the search, correct?
No,
Now, we had listened to some jail calls that you had listened to of Josh while he was in jail, correct?
yes,
And you recall listening to jail calls of Josh on August 19th, 2020 from the jail?
not specifically, but I'm sure I did.
Do you recall doing a supplement about it?
No,
If I may approach.
You may.
Your Honor, I would object to the defense going into this. These are statements from the defendant. The defendant can testify if he wants to present his own statement.
okay, I recall it.
So have you had an opportunity now to review the supplement that you drafted regarding the jail calls you listened to?
Yes, sir.
And you testified that now your recollection is refreshed regarding these jail calls?
Yes,
And in fact, in the jail call on August 19th, 2020, which was approximately 3 weeks before you met with Rebecca, when she turned in her 380, correct?
yes,
And during that jail call, you had heard Josh speak with an Aaron Spice, correct?
yes,
And during that call, Josh had speculated Aaron Spice.
I'm gonna sustain the objection, it's not statement of party opponent. Can't get it right.
Well, Your Honor, is just going to go regarding the missing gun issue, which the officer already testified.
Can't claim it was not a statement of party opponent.
Let me ask you this, Detective Artis, did you have reason to believe prior to Rebecca coming to the police department on September 10th and turning in her gun, that a gun may have been missing from the crime scene?
I did not have reason to believe there was a gun missing from the crime scene, which I considered to be outside in the garage area.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I had no reason to believe there was a gun missing from the crime scene, which was the driveway and garage area.
Well, we've heard crime scene defined differently here throughout the course of this trial. Would you agree that the crime scene also extended to Dan Schrader's residence where John Miller fled to?
Well, that's part of the scene. I don't know, that's the crime scene, but yes, that's part of the scene.
Would you consider the scene to be Rebecca's house?
It's not part of the crime scene, it's part of the scene.
Well, you drafted a search warrant for Rebecca's house, correct?
Correct,
Looking for evidence of a crime, correct?
correct.
And so did you not have cause to believe on September 10th, when you met with Rebecca, that evidence in the form of a pistol was missing from either the scene or the crime scene?
I'm sorry, can you state that again?
Did you have reason to believe prior to meeting with Rebecca on September 10th, when she turned in her pistol, that there may have been a pistol missing from the scene or the crime scene?
No,
Do you recall drafting a supplement with information
I'm
pertaining
gonna
to
object again, Your Honor, this goes to statements made by the defendant, and again, he's going to have to testify if he wants to put his statements before the jury.
I can't hear you when you talk away from the mic.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, the defense is trying to go into statements the defendant himself made. He's going to have to testify if he wants those statements before the jury.
I didn't ask for any particular statement. I'm just asking if he had cause to believe or evidence that a gun may have been missing from the scene prior to.
Answer that question, no. Let's move on.
Now, you testified that you listened to a jail call between Josh and Lee Hilgendorf, correct?
I didn't listen to several, yes.
Several. And to one of them regarding an incident where Josh talked about Rebecca pointing a gun at him, correct?
Yes,
And something to the effect that Josh said about Lee would have to make that good or tell that good or something along those lines, correct?
make it sound like he saw it.
Was there any date associated with this incident of that Lee may have or supposedly saw Rebecca point a gun at Josh?
No,
So from the context of it or explicitly in the words, you don't know if they were talking about August 4th, 2020 or some event earlier in time?
that's correct.
Now, at any point on August 4th, 2020, did you have occasion to go to Mercy Medical Center?
I did not.
Nothing further, thank you.
I have no further questions.
Can we step down?
And I would just ask that the exhibit, I believe 7B2, be returned with the officer to the OPD evidence room. I understand that this is stipulation, the defense as to that.
No objection.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll send you in for a break. Back in about 15 minutes.
Rise to the jury. Yes, both books will be here.
Please be seated.
You know where witnesses?
Yes, that is correct.
Give me an idea how long?
The analyst is probably going to be at least an hour, so we could potentially get through the other two by the end of the day. So we could potentially get through them all.
I just have one thing, Judge. After Detective Brett Robertson was finished
testifying, you asked the state if they had any redirect. They said no, and then he was excused. I'd like him to remain under the defense subpoena.
I have no objection to that.
Michelle? All right. Let's take a break to 15 minutes, back here 2:45. Next one.
Thank you.
That it is. I can hardly move. God, I'm sweating my ears.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We'll continue on with the state next witness.
State calls April Pinky.
You solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yourself. You don't have to be real close. It's up to you. If you're comfortable, you may take your mask off while you testify. Only one person talks at a time as she's taking it.
Finish.
Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is April Hinky.
And are you recently retired?
I am.
I'm sorry, I kind of let you spell your last name.
My last name is spelled Hinke.
Thank you. Are you recently retired?
I am.
And prior to your retirement, where did you work?
I was a police detective for the Oshkosh Police Department until February 5th this year.
And how long have you been a detective?
I was a detective for about 17 years and had been at the police department for about 25 years.
Did you participate in the investigation of a shooting on Minnesota Street in Oshkosh on August 4th, 2020?
Yes, I did.
Where did you first go when you were called to assist in that investigation?
I received a call from Detective Artist to have me respond to Theta Medical Center up in Mena, where I was to meet the ambulance that was transporting a male victim.
Do you know that male victim's name?
John Miller.
Was John Miller willing to answer all of your questions at the hospital?
Yes, he was.
When you were interviewing him at the hospital, did he make any spontaneous, urgent statements about other individuals?
Yes, he was talking with me and then kind of sat up in the cot quickly and said, "You need to call Carla or Julie and you need to tell them they need to get out of there." Something along that lines.
And do you know why he was saying that?
Well, I believe Carla's his girlfriend and Julie is Rebecca's mom, and he was concerned for their safety. He followed up by making a statement to the effect of he knows where they live or where they're staying or something like that.
While you were at the hospital, did John Miller give you permission to access his cell phone?
Yes, he did.
After getting your statement from John Miller, where did you go next?
Detective Artist and I drove to the Oregon Police Department, which is in Greene County, Wisconsin, where Mr. Aide was in police custody.
And did you make contact with Mr. Aide there?
Yes, we did.
Can you identify Mr. Aide in the courtroom?
Mr. Aide is seated next to the defense attorney, Scott Seaman. He's wearing a bluish purple colored button-down shirt under a gray suit.
The individual to my left?
Yes.
Just ask that the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant.
Good job.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as state's exhibits 73 to 80. Do those appear to be pictures that you took of the defendant at the Oregon Police Department?
Yes, they are.
And I would just ask Your Honor that we can publish those to the jury. So can you just explain to the jury when you're doing an investigation, what's the purpose of taking photos of the suspect?
So we like to document an individual as we see them that particular day or the time, police have contacted them for several reasons. I'm, one, looking to see if he is injured, but I'm also looking to see if he might have anything that looks of any evidentiary use of my investigation, as well. So I took these pictures of Mr. Aide in an effort to show an overall picture of how he looked to police the night he was taken into custody.
And you said one thing you were looking for was injuries, or one thing you looked for is injuries to the suspect. Did you observe any injuries to Joshua Aide that night?
No, I did not.
And if we could just move forward to Exhibit 74, Exhibit 75, Exhibit 76, 77. Now, on Exhibit 77, did you observe any indication of his hands that he'd been defending himself in some sort of fist fight or any manner?
No, I did not.
78, 79, and 8. And if we could just go back to the full view 73. So it looks like you took a frontal picture and a back picture. Did you observe any blood on Joshua Aide?
No, I did not.
Did you observe any swelling to any part of his body?
I did not notice any injuries, and he did not complain of any injuries.
Did he complain that he'd been the victim in any sort of crime?
No, he did not.
Moving forward to the next day, August 5th, 2020, did you have an opportunity to access John Miller's phone?
Yes, I did.
Did you see anything notable in John Miller's call history related to this investigation?
Yes, Mr. Miller had informed me that he had received a phone call from Joshua Aide on August 4th prior to leaving Wind Lake, Wisconsin, and traveling to Oshkosh. I was able to locate a phone call that lasted about 2 minutes and 26 seconds that occurred at 2:41 p.m. according to the call log on Mr. Miller's phone. There was an incoming call, and in looking at the number, it appeared that Mr. Aide had called Joshua's phone at that time.
Now, in continuing your investigation, on August 10th, did you send John Miller a photo, kind of an overview of the crime scene?
I did.
And what was your purpose in sending him that?
Well, detectives were still scouring this area looking for any potential evidence at the scene. We were trying to determine exactly where he may have been when he was shot in the face. And so at the time that I was interviewing Mr. Miller at the hospital, it was very hard because he was being worked on, he had to go to surgery, he had facial injuries, so sometimes it was hard to understand exactly what he was trying to say. So I sent the photograph to him and asked him to mark on the photograph where he had been standing with a J. I asked him to put an R where Rebecca had been. I asked him to put an X where the suspect was, and then for him to place a dashed line indicating the path that he ran from the garage and through the yard because we were looking for any potential evidence.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 38. Does that appear to be the photograph that he had marked and returned to?
Yes, that's the photograph, and I had placed the black box over Mr. Bruner's body.
Okay, I would just ask to publish State's Exhibit 38 to the jury.
May.
So what we're seeing here is that what you just described, the R is where Mr. Miller described Rebecca as, the J is for John, where he was, is that correct?
Correct.
And that X would be where the defendant was standing?
Correct.
And if we could just scroll a little bit so you can see that path there. So would the path be from the back of the car around the front and through the yard as we're seeing in that picture?
Yes,
Now, moving forward to August 14th, did you return to Rebecca's house?
I did.
And was that to continue looking for any evidence?
Correct. Detective Artist and Detective Robertson and I were still trying to piece this together with this map and just trying to go through everything that we could to locate anything more.
I show you state's exhibits 64 through 67. Do those appear to be photos that were taken when you returned to the house on the 14th to look for more evidence?
Yes,
I just asked to publish this to the jury. What's relevant in this photo related to additional evidence that you found?
well, as depicted in State's Exhibit 67, there was a copper or brass jacket from a bullet fired, presumably by Mr. Aide, in the direction at which Mr. Miller informed me that it was part of the path that he had taken based on his drawing.
And if we could just go back to the so that picture there, where that ruler is that approximately where the jacket was located?
Yes,
And if we go back to State's Exhibit 38, is the location of that jacket consistent with the defendant standing where John placed the X? Or where John placed the X, John running around to the front of the car and the defendant firing as he's coming around there?
absolutely.
Was that jacket taken and placed into evidence at OPD?
It was.
I apologize, Oshkosh Police Department.
Yes, it was.
I'd like to move forward to December of 2020. At the end of December, did you travel to Freighter Hospital in Milwaukee?
Yes.
Why did you go there?
I had been informed that Rebecca had surgery and a bullet had been removed by a surgeon there and that the bullet was ready to be picked up for evidentiary reasons. So I traveled there, picked it up and brought it back and placed it in our evidence control center.
I have no further questions.
Ross?
Thank you. Now, Detective Hinkie, at the start of your testimony, you stated at one point while you were speaking with John Miller, he stated that you needed to call Carla and Julie right away or something to that effect, correct?
Yes, at some time, it wasn't right away when I started, interviewing him, but it was at some point in time during my contact with him, yes.
Yeah, I meant at the start of your testimony.
Oh, yes, sir.
It was later in the interview, correct?
Correct.
And he had told you that Josh had known where they had lived, correct?
I believe that's what he said, yes.
And
Or you knew where they were or something like that.
something to that effect. And he appeared concerned for their safety, is that be fair to say?
Yes,
And would it be fair to say he was concerned about Josh engaging in some form of retaliation against them?
I would presume so, since he was concerned for their safety and he was making remarks that Josh knew where they were.
And in fact, Mr. Miller had told you that he had known Jim
for several years, correct?
I believe that's what he said at the time. But, as time has gone on, and I think, like I said, that situation when he was being treated was very fluid because he was trying to talk, they're trying to suction his mouth, I'm asking him questions. I don't know how accurate that is anymore, but I believe that's what he told me at the time.
And that's reflected in your report, correct?
That's correct.
And as time went on, things have changed with Jim, fair to say?
Well, I think that there was just some misinterpretation or communication between the two of us.
And you testified that you had John mark on what's been submitted as State's Exhibit number 38, the pattern that he had ran when he was shot, correct?
That's correct.
And you testified that you had him do that because you were still trying to determine where John Miller was shot, correct?
Correct.
And that's because he had been giving you different versions as to where he was when he was shot, correct?
No.
Isn't that true that at the hospital when you spoke to him, he advised you that he was standing in front of the Tahoe, and as he turned away from the Tahoe, he observed a black handgun pointing at him from 3 to 4 feet away. Do you recall John Miller saying that?
He did say that.
And John Miller stated that he turned away quickly but was shot in the face. Do you recall that?
He did say that.
Miller told you that he ran from the open garage to the home next door. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And then later, Mr. Miller had stated that after Josh had approached, he had run around the white Ford Taurus and was shot in that area between the garage and the house as he was attempting to flee, correct?
No. So, like I said, Mr. Miller was being treated for a face injury, and he was having difficulty talking because he had damage to his tongue, his mouth, and there was lots of people working on him. And so he's trying to quickly tell me the story. We are looking for Mr. Aide at the time that I'm talking with him. So he's telling me what went on in an abrupt way as they're suctioning his mouth. So it's kind of difficult to get a one-by-one play here. He's telling me that he's standing in front of the radiator, and the next thing he knows, he's got a gun pointed at him. He's told me he turned away. He told me he was shot. He told me he ran. Mr. Miller was in a somewhat anxious and injured state at the time. He never changed his story per se as to where he was shot. I just think that at the time it was so fluid and it was coming out, and that's how I wrote the report, is how he talked that night. But based on the detectives searching the garage and us combing over this entire area, it just wasn't adding up where, him being shot in the garage. And I don't think he knows exactly where he was shot.
So based on the subsequent investigation, his initial statement to you just wasn't adding up?
No, that's not true. I think he was in a state of shock and he was injured and he was recalling what he recalled that night.
And that's your opinion?
Sure.
No further questions, thank you.
Just a couple questions. What he told you was when the gun was pointed at him, he turned to run, is that correct?
Correct.
And then he provided you the path of travel that he had run?
Correct, because I wasn't really able to give him that night. We just didn't have the opportunity.
Sure. And when you talked to him that night, fair to say you didn't mark on the car or on the path anything that would have given you information on where exactly he might have been when he was shot?
I'm sorry, restate your question.
When you talked to him that night, he pretty much just indicated he turned to run and was shot, correct?
Right, we didn't get into details which direction he went around the car, we didn't talk about the car being in the driveway, he just said he turned and ran.
So the picture he drew is consistent with that statement and with the evidence in that it appears to show the bullet jacket where it could have went through his face if the defendant was standing on the X John Drew and John was running around the front of the car.
Correct, because the entry wound was to the right side of his face, and the exit wound was on the left side of his face.
Which is consistent with his drawing.
Correct.
No further questions.
But the drawing is not consistent with the initial statement he gave you that he was standing in front of the Tahoe when he turned and was shot, correct?
He was consistent with me throughout my contact with him.
Thank you. No further questions.
No further questions.
Release.
State calls Heather Williams.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You don't need to be right on top of the microphone. If you're comfortable, it's up to you. You can take the mask off while you testify. And then only one person talks at a time because she's taking it all down.
Okay, thank you.
Who's Nash?
Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
First name is Heather, Heather. Last name is Williams, Williams.
And Ms. Williams, how are you employed?
I am a firearms and toolmark examiner at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory located in Milwaukee.
And can you just explain for the jury what it is you do?
Yes, as a firearms and toolmark examiner, I conduct examinations of firearms and firearms-related evidence, such as fire cartridge cases and fired bullets.
What sort of tools do you use to do that?
One of the instruments that we use to do our analysis is called a comparison microscope. What a comparison microscope is two microscopes that are connected by an optical bridge. This allows myself as an examiner to be able to look at two objects simultaneously side by side to compare the markings that are left on those objects.
And how long have you been employed doing this?
I have been employed for a little over 5 years.
And what sort of training and experience do you have that qualifies you for this position?
I first hold a Bachelor's of Science degree in Law Enforcement and Justice Administration with a minor in Forensic Science. During my undergraduate degree, I also completed a 525-hour internship at the DuPage County Forensic Science Center and also at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. I completed the Firearm and Toolmark Training Program. It's an apprentice-type training program in which you get both hands-on and classroom-like instruction, much like that of, say, a plumber or an electrician.
And as part of that training, do you have training in the use of this microscope you're describing?
Yes, we do.
Can you just describe for the jury the science behind what you do?
Yes, as a firearms and toolmark examiner, what I am doing is I'm first with firearms determining if a firearm is functional. and it is safe to test fire. With fired evidence, such as fired bullets and fired cartridge cases, what I am looking at is to determine if I can tell if those fired cartridge cases or fired bullets have been fired in the same firearm. And in instances in which we have a submitted firearm, I am looking to see if that fired evidence was or was not fired in the submitted firearm.
Now, can you just describe for the jury, what an unfired shell casing, what are the components of that?
Yep, for an unfired cartridge, it's going to consist of 4 components. You'll first have the cartridge case, you'll have the primer, you'll have the propellant or gunpowder, and then you also have the projectile or bullet.
And what do you do to determine whether a firearm is functional when you receive one in your lab?
Yep. For a function test, what we will do is we will check the condition of the firearm as well as all safeties that are associated with that firearm. The purpose of this is to first ensure that the firearm is a functional firearm, and then instances in which we have fired evidence that we are determining if that firearm is safe to test fire to produce those test fires.
And if you have a firearm that is safe to fire, can you just describe what sort of, does each firearm, even if it's a different firearm of the same make or model, have its own signature?
Yes, each firearm is going to have specific markings that are left on any type of fired evidence that is fired through that specific firearm. This is because during the manufacturing process, microscopic or in what I call individual characteristics are transferred on to the different parts of a firearm that are created by those tools that create that specific piece. For example, a firing pin. The tool that creates that firing pin is going to transfer these microscopic markings onto that firing pin. Each time that tool is used, it is changing. So with each firing pin, it is changing. So new markings are on each firing pin that is produced by that specific tool. The same would be said for the rifling or that spiral pattern in the bore of the barrel. Each time the tool that creates that rifling is used, it's changing. So with each rifling and within the barrel, it's going to be different and have those different microscopic characteristics.
So once you determine that a firearm is functional within your lab, what do you do to determine its signature?
What we will do is we will look at those test fired cartridge cases and test fired bullets that we produced under that comparison microscope. That way we can look at the test fires and look at the markings that are transferred from that specific firearm to fired evidence or fired pieces that are fired from that firearm. So we're looking at the markings that are created from that firearm.
I'd like to show you State's Exhibits 83 and 84. Can you just describe for the jury what Exhibit 83 is?
Yes, Exhibit 83 is the laboratory receipt for this specific case. I can tell that based upon the specific laboratory number that is on here that's associated with this case. And it has the items that were submitted for this specific case.
And when you're talking about this specific case, is it designated as R20-2289?
Correct, yes.
And the relevant parties to this are listed as Rebecca Borkowski, James Grutner, John Miller, and Joshua Aide?
Correct, yes.
Can you just describe the items that you received?
Yes, based upon this receipt, item A is one sealed evidence envelope containing fired cartridge case, .380 shell. Item B is one sealed evidence envelope containing fired cartridge case, .380 shell. Item C is one sealed evidence envelope containing fired cartridge case .380 shell. Item D is one sealed cardboard box containing handgun described as .380 Ruger LCP in holster with mag and bullets. Item E is one sealed plastic evidence bag containing fired bullet fragment reportedly collected from James Grutner during autopsy. The second receipt for this case has item designated F. This is one sealed evidence envelope containing item described as metal jacket from possible bullet from driveway. And the third receipt for this case has item letter G, which is one heat-sealed plastic bag containing fired bullet removed from Rebecca Borkowski during surgery on 12/9/20.
Now, when you received these items, were you able to determine functionality of the Ruger 380?
Yes, I was able to determine that the Ruger model LCP was a functional firearm and that it was safe to test fire.
And did you test fire it to look at its markings?
I did, yes.
And can you just describe what you did with all of this evidence you received?
Yes, what I did is I compared my test fired cartridge cases with the 3 fired cartridge cases that were submitted for this case. So those are items A, B, and C. Once I determined that they had the same basic characteristics, or what we call class characteristics, which is going to be, do they have the same type of caliber? So in this case, 380 automatic caliber was the caliber for the firearm, as well as the caliber of the fired cartridge cases. I looked at my test fires from that submitted firearm to the fired cartridge cases using that comparison microscope, where I was able to determine that those 3 fired cartridge cases had the same markings that were left on my test fired cartridge cases from the submitted firearm. So in other words, the 3 fired .380 automatic caliber cartridge cases were fired in the submitted firearm.
Okay, and moving on to let's talk about the jacket, item F. What did you determine regarding that?
I was able to determine that the bullet jacket fragment had a right-hand twist, which is going to be the twist of that rifling, which is in the bore or that rifling of the barrel of a firearm. So I had the same class characteristics there. I was able to determine that that fragment, along with the 2 other full metal jacket bullets that were submitted for this case, were fired through the barrel of the submitted firearm.
And those 2 bullets would be item E, the bullet fragment collected from James Grutner during his autopsy, and item G, the bullet removed from Rebecca Borkowski during her surgery?
Correct, yes.
So I guess to summarize, all of the items that, the projectiles that were sent to you were determined to be fired from the 380 Ruger that was sent to you as well?
Correct, yes.
Did you follow all lab procedures in conducting the testing on this evidence you received?
I did, yes.
And is there a manner of verification within your lab when you come up with a result?
Yes, any time that we come up with an identification, elimination, or inconclusive result, that is then looked at by a second qualified examiner in this section. So in this case, all the items that I examined, the 3 fired cartridge cases and the 3 fired projectiles were looked at by a second examiner in this section. Once the verification process is complete, then we go through a peer review process, which all notes and reports are looked at to make sure everything is clear, complete, and accurate. And then we also had an administrative review in which a supervisor will then look at all notes and reports along with the case to make sure everything is clear, complete, and accurate. In this case, all 3 of those steps were completed.
Okay, and was the determination in those 3 steps that these were accurate results that you're testifying to?
Correct, yes. In the verification process, they did come to the same conclusion that the evidence was fired in the submitted firearm.
And are the findings in your report based on your training and experience?
Correct, yes.
No further questions.
Ross?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Now, you testified that you had tested in this case 3 cases that were submitted, shell cases that were submitted, correct?
Correct, yes.
And 3 projectiles, correct?
Correct, yes.
But actually, would it be fair to say it was 2 projectiles and 1 fragment of a projectile casing, Exhibit F?
Yes, so there's 2 fired full metal jacket bullets, which were full bullets. They were completely intact. And then there was a fired bullet jacket fragment, which is going to be the jacketing portion of a full metal jacket bullet or some type of jacketed bullet. An example I like to use is a M&M. So you can think of the analogy of an M&M as a jacketed bullet. You're going to have that soft chocolate center with a harder coating. And then with the jacketed bullet, you're going to have a soft lead core with the jacketing that's around that.
And would it be fair to say that it's easier to conduct your analysis of the rifling on a intact but bullet as opposed to fragmented casing?
That is not always the case. When you're talking about that bullet jacket, it's that jacketing material that is going to have those markings from that rifling. So that rifling pad within the bore of the barrel is left in the jacketing portion. So if we have that jacketing portion of a bullet, we're able to analyze that to determine if it was or was not fired through a barrel.
Do you have exhibit number 67 up in front of you? Can we maybe put that up on the?
Is it the pictures?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There should be a number of photographs. One of them identified as States Exhibit 67.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Can you identify what that's a photograph of?
Yes, this is a photograph of a bullet jacket.
And do you recall if the bullet jacket, if that's the bullet jacket that you examined in this case?
If this is the bullet jacket that was submitted under item designated F, then this would be the bullet jacket.
And you recall doing that analysis, is that fair to say?
Correct, yes, I did analyze the bullet jacket submitted for this case.
And what, if any, steps did you have to take with the jacket in this case to get a full picture of the rifling that was imprinted on the jacket?
What I first do is I will look at the bullet jacket under a stereoscope so I can see what those basic or class characteristics are. So in this case, I was able to see that the direction of twist of the rifling was on a right-hand twist. So it means that the rifling is going towards the right. Then when I did my comparison analysis with the additional fired evidence and also my test fires, I used that comparison microscope. So I mounted the test fired jacket, the submitted bullet jacket to my comparison microscope, in which I looked at what lands and grooves were left on this bullet jacket to the land and groove impressions from my test fired bullet for the submitted firearm.
Now, in this fragment, you didn't have the entirety of all the lands and grooves on the jacket because it was fragmented, fair to say?
Correct, yes.
And a right-hand twist, is that not a fairly common rifling pattern in handguns?
That is, yes.
Do you have an estimate as to how many handguns are produced with a right-hand twist as opposed to a left-hand twist?
I do not know.
And in fact, that's to give the bullet, the projectile, a spiraling effect when it's fired, correct?
Correct, yes, that's what the rifling is.
And are you aware, in fact, that there are any handguns made with a left-hand twist?
Yes, there are.
The vast majority right-hand?
To my recollection, most are right-handed twist, yes.
Now, you also examined 3 cases, correct?
Yes, 3 fired cartridge cases.
And you testified that you compared the markings on the fired cartridge cases with those from your test cartridge, correct?
Correct, yes.
How many test cartridges did you fire, or how many test rounds did you fire from the Ruger handgun that was submitted?
If I recall correctly, it was 2 test fires.
And did you compare those 2 test fires with each other?
Yes,
And did they appear consistent?
they did, yes.
Now, you testified that the submitted cases, the 3 submitted cases in this case, had consistent markings with your test cartridge, correct?
Correct, yes.
And what was it that was consistent, the firing pin on the primer?
What I determined on this is that I made my analysis for and I made my conclusion that they were fired in the same firearm were based on breech face marks, which the breech face or bolt face is the area in which a firing pin comes out of, as well as I also looked at shear marks, which shear marks can be caused by either the blowback of the firing pin and it shears as it's getting ejected from that firearm, or also it can shear as it is already getting ejected from, let's say, the slide at the top of that ejection port area. So it was the shear as well as the breech face, along with the basic characteristics of being 380 automatic or cartridge case, having the same.
380 automatic.
Oh, I'm sorry, 380 automatic caliber cartridge case. Along with also having that hemispherical firing pin shape.
And now you make that initial determination that you're dealing with the same caliber because there's multiple different calibers of firearms, correct?
Correct, yes.
And when you talk about a 380 caliber, you're talking about the dimension, is that fair to say, of the size of the casing?
Yeah, when you're talking about caliber, it can talk about a few different things. Caliber can be the type of cartridge that is compatible with a specific firearm. It also deals with the bore or the diameter of that bore or the inside of the barrel, along with bullet. You have to deal with that diameter of a bullet.
And in this case, when you're talking about 380, you're talking about you're talking about all of that, right? You're talking about the diameter of the bullet as well as the bore, correct?
Correct, yes.
And that's an industry standard for 380 caliber or any calibration of a firearm. That's set as an industry standard for the size of projectiles, correct?
Correct, yes.
Because there's a lot of different makes of 380 caliber firearms, correct?
Correct, yes.
And there's a lot of different manufacturers of 380 caliber ammunition, fair to say?
Correct, yes.
And so you know that there's an industry standard that governs the sizing of 380 caliber ammunition to be compatible with all the various types of 380 firearms. Is that fair to say?
Yes, correct.
And so 380 caliber firearms, regardless of the make, have the same size bore to shoot the same size ammunition, correct?
Correct, yes.
And that would be same with the extractors as well, correct?
They would. If it's a semi-automatic pistol, it will have an extractor, yes.
And there's an industry standard set for the extractors as well, in order to grip the case and extract it from the gun, correct?
Yes, most semi-automatic pistols will have that extractor.
And so these are essentially industry standard produced across the board, regardless of manufacturer, to be compatible with the various makes of the same size ammunition.
Correct, yes.
And so when you have a case like this, if there's an issue regarding one or more weapons that may have fired a submitted casing, it would be relevant, would it not, to have all weapons that fired the suspect casing to determine if there's any differences?
What we're looking at again are those microscopic characteristics. So those are the markings that are produced during that manufacturing process. So each firearm, each part of that is going to be making what's going to be unique with that specific firearm. Each firearm is going to have one firing pin that was made from a different tool. It's going to have the breech face, that part of that firearm was made by a different tool. You're going to have an extractor that was made by another tool. You'll also have an ejector that was made by another tool. So when we were looking at our fire evidence and we're looking at our test fires and comparing them to see if the fire evidence was or was not fired in the submitted firearm, we're looking at everything. We're not looking at just one single thing. We're looking at the whole picture, which again, each one of those parts are made separately and then they come together to make that firearm.
And each one of those parts come together to make that firearm to a set industry standard across the board, correct?
There are standards in to make sure that that firearm is a functional firearm, that it is safe for people to fire.
And this isn't like DNA where you're talking 1 in 7 trillion chance, correct?
No, when you're looking at that, you're looking at the experience of the examiner. So we're looking at those markings that are going to produce specific patterns on that fired evidence.
And were you given any other type of gun to fire a test round through to compare these submitted casings and projectiles with?
In this case, I was given only the Ruger Model LCP Item D.
So you were not asked to do a test comparison with a Smith & Wesson 380 in this case?
No, I was not.
No further questions, thank you.
Anything?
No questions.
Can you step down? Ready for Sabina?
Yes, please.
Ready for Sabina? Okay, call the next witness.
State calls Victoria Heidemann.
Come over here in the end, raise your hand for us.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Pull yourself up. You not have to be right on top of the microphone. If you're comfortable, you may take the mask off while you testify. And then we'll do some talk sometimes, you takes everything down.
Match.
Ms. Heidemann, can you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
Yep, Victoria Heidemann, Heidemann.
And how are you employed?
I'm the crime analyst at the City of Oshkosh Police Department.
How long have you been employed in that role?
4 years.
Can you just describe for the jury your training and experience that led you to that position?
Sure. So I have a master's degree in crime management and justice administration. My emphasis was on crime analysis. Prior to that role, I worked for the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office as a 911 dispatcher. I also served 10 years in the Wisconsin Army National Guard as a military police officer.
As part of your role with the Oshkosh Police Department, do you review and analyze downloads of electronic devices?
Yes, I do.
Does that include cell phones?
Yes.
On or about on August 4th, 2020, did you become involved in an investigation of a shooting that occurred on Minnesota Street in Oshkosh?
Yes, I did.
Did you become aware of the suspect's name in that incident?
Yes.
And what was it?
Joshua Aide.
According to your department's records, what time did the 911 call first come in to dispatch related to the incident involving Joshua Aide?
8:27 p.m.
And when was that uploaded to officers?
So that was put in to our CADS, it's our computer automated dispatch system, is how they get their calls at 8:29.
What was your role in the investigation that night?
That night, I got a call at home. Right away, I was given a phone number and they wanted me to determine whose phone number it was. It was said to be the suspect's phone number. So using my tools, I came up with Joshua Aide's name. I then came into work and the phone Joshua's phone was being pinged at that time. And I was assisting in putting the pings onto Google Maps to see where the phone was located to help speak with other agencies to try to locate Joshua.
And what exactly, when you're putting these pings in, what exactly are you doing and what are you seeing?
Right, so under emergency circumstances, cell phone companies can ping a device or a cell phone. So they'll basically get the latitude and longitude of where that device was last showing, and they'll give that to us. And I was being forwarded those latitude and longitude coordinates. I was typing them into Google Maps and then relaying that information to my coworkers and then to state patrol and other agencies as to where that phone was last located.
And are you aware of whether Joshua Aide was arrested shortly after you were engaged in that?
Yes.
In the days that followed Joshua Aide's arrest, what was your role regarding electronic devices in this case?
So I was assisting with, I took screenshots of a conversation from Facebook between Rebecca and Joshua, and then I did a report on that. I also helped examine the cell phones involved in this case.
And was the defendant's cell phone analyzed as part of this investigation?
Yes.
And were Rebecca Borkowski's and John Miller's cell phones analyzed as well?
Yes.
I'm gonna hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 88, as well as State's Exhibits 14 through 20. Can you describe what State's Exhibit 88 is?
Yeah, so this is an extraction report from Rebecca's phone, and it is showing images that were pulled off of her phone and what's called metadata. So metadata is listed in this first box right here. You can think of it as a fingerprint of a cell phone. So it'll tell you what type of phone took that image, the date and time, and that's like the forever stamp that's on that photo. So this is a copy of that.
Your Honor, I would move to admit State's I'm sorry, I think it's already been admitted into evidence.
It has.
Thank you. I would, regarding State's Exhibits 14 through 17 that you have before you, do those photographs show up as thumbnails on this extraction report?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would just ask to publish those to the jury as we go through them.
If that previously marked that accepted.
Okay, 14 and 15. And 16. And 17. Can you just tell the jury when the capture date is for those photographs, 14 through 17?
Sure. Let me find. So on all of these, there's two different dates. For 14, that's going to be 3/26/2016. For 15, that is 3/26/2016. This is the same photo, sorry. Okay. For 16, it is 3/26/2016. Oh, the iPhones are a little out of order. For 17, it is 3/26/2016.
And so for those photos that March 26, 2016 would be the date they were originally taken?
Yes.
Now, moving on to what's been marked as states exhibits 18 through 20, do those also show up on the extraction report?
Yes, they do.
Can you, just ask to publish those to the jury as we go through those? Thank you. Can you indicate, so for 18, 19, and 20, can you indicate the capture dates for those photographs?
They are 9/16/2018.
And did you review Joshua Aide's cell phone download records specifically from July 29th, 2020 through August 5th, 2020?
Yes.
So I'd like to talk to you about his call records specifically related to August 4th, 2020. And it's been marked as States Exhibit 89. Does that appear to reflect the defendant's call log from August 4th, 2020?
Yes.
I would ask to, or move to admit States Exhibit 89 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
Receive exhibit 89.
So I'd like to direct your attention to the page number 6, so we can talk about calls specifically on August 4th, 2020. Directing you to call labeled 56, does this reflect a call from the defendant to a phone number associated with John Miller?
Yes.
And what time was that call?
That is at 2:41.
And how long was it?
2 minutes and 26 seconds.
The defendant's next call, 55, who was that call to?
That is to Rebecca
And what time was that
at 14:59.
at? And 2:59 PM?
Yep, correct.
And does it appear that call was answered?
No,
And next call, 54, who was that call to?
that is to Rebecca as well,
At what time?
at 3 o'clock.
And does it appear that call was answered?
No,
The next call labeled 53, is that an incoming call?
that is.
And who is that from?
That is from Rebecca
At what time?
at 3.
And does it appear that the call connected or the parties spoke?
Yes,
And how long was that call?
a 17-minute and 8-second phone call.
And moving up to call 50,
Okay,
was that another incoming call from Rebecca?
yes,
And what time was that call?
at 8:21. Oh, I'm sorry, the time was at 4:53, and it was 8 minutes and 21 seconds.
Thank you. Now, the next 8 calls labeled 49 through 52, are those all outgoing calls the defendant made to Rebecca?
Yes.
And if you could just go through the next calls, 49 through 42, indicate the time of the call and the length of the call?
Yes, so 49 is to Rebecca, that is at 5:02. That looks like if they connected, it was a 4-minute and 27-second long phone call. The next one is to Rebecca at 5:07, that was not answered. There's one at 17:07, so 5:07, that was a 45-second call. That one does appear on her phone log as well, so that connected. How far down did you want me to?
Sorry,
Call number 50.
thank you. Oh. Sorry, just a moment.
excuse me, through 42.
Through 42, okay, so going, okay, all right. So we are on 46. So this is another outgoing call to Rebecca at 5:08, 3 seconds, so that was not answered. This is another one to Rebecca, the next one up at 5:08 again, that's a minute and 52 seconds. I'm not sure if that was answered. Another outgoing call to Rebecca at 5:10, that was not answered. Another one at 5:11, 2 seconds, not answered. Another one to Rebecca, and this is 42 at 5:11, that is a 12-minute and 55-second call.
Now, moving on to call labeled 40, is that a call Rebecca made to the defendant?
Yes,
And what time was that call?
5:29,
How long was that call?
15 minutes and 53 seconds.
Now, based on your review of both Rebecca's call log and the defendant's call log, would that be the last time the parties spoke that night?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to move on to the next 31 calls labeled 39 through 9. What time period does that group of calls reflect?
So 39 starts at 6:36 p.m. And then if we move on to 9, on page 1, that is at 8:05 p.m.
And were those all outgoing calls?
They were
Who did the defendant make those calls to?
to Rebecca.
Can you just go through and tell the jury the time that Joshua made each of those calls from 39 to 9?
Yes. 39 is at 6:36, 38 at 6:37, 37 at 6:38, 36 is at 6:39, 35 is at 6:40, 34 is at 6:41, 33 at 6:44, 32 at 6:50, 31 at 6:56, 30 is at 7:01, 29 is at 7:02, 28 7:02, 27 7:03, 26 7:04, 25 7:04, 24 7:11, 23 7:12, 22 7:21, 21 7:22, 20 is at 7:22, 19 7:30, 18 7:31, 17 7:32, 16 7:32, 15 7:42, 14 7:48, 13 7:49, 12 is at 8 o'clock, 11 8:04, 10 8:05, and again at 9, or number 9 at 8:05.
So the last call made to Rebecca was at 8:05 p.m. on August 4th?
Yes. Well, then there's another call at,
Well, prior to the 911 call was that?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Does it appear that any of those 31 calls were answered by Rebecca?
No.
Now, when you go through and look at both the defendant's call log and Rebecca's call log, are you able to determine that those calls were connecting?
Yes.
And how can you determine that?
So the phone calls would not appear on Rebecca's call log had they not connected with cell phone tower and then to her phone. And then all 31 of those calls are on Joshua's phone log as well as Rebecca's.
So 31 calls in 90 minutes, that's about a call to Rebecca every 3 minutes for an hour and a half while she didn't answer?
Yes.
Can you describe again that program you had mentioned called CellHawk?
Sure. CellHawk is a program that I use to map historic cell phone data. So law enforcement agencies can request this data from cell companies, and they give it to a format where you upload it to the program, and then it plots out where a cell phone or a device is connecting to a tower. So you can see a movement of that device on a map, so it's easy to read.
And did you,
When you reviewed Joshua's phone, were you able to put coordinates for his cell tower connections into Cellhawk and come up with a map of his travel?
Yes.
And I'd like to show you, state would ask to move exhibit 7O into evidence and publish to the jury electronically.
Objection?
Objection.
Receive the exhibit.
If we could just turn down the lights as well for this one. 7O. 7O. So I'm gonna play the video and then stop at 40 seconds just for a couple of questions. And that stopped at 42. So Ms. Heckman, is it correct that what we're seeing there is the switches between cell towers that Joshua Aide's phone was communicating with?
So this is showing what cell phone towers the phone used to connect with when he was making the phone calls. So it shows you a pie shape, and that's the sector of the tower it connected with. Not every tower, but most cell phone towers have 3 different sectors that are 120 degrees. And that's just a visual representation of where that tower is.
And are those reflecting the call times that we just went through from 6:36 to 8:05?
Yes.
And did you put each of the calls on this map or just a portion of them?
So I don't do this individually. I'll upload them as a mass, and it will take all of the ones that have latitude and longitude attached to it. So yes.
And can you tell the jury the time of the last cell tower connection at 8:05? Where was that connecting?
That was connecting to a cell phone tower. If you see at the top of the map, that's right in Fond du Lac.
And again, the 911 call came in at 8:27 PM?
Yes.
Now, I guess if we can just continue through and play the rest of the video, and then I'll ask you a couple more questions. Now, does that reflect connections heading back toward the Madison, Monticello area?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to show you 2 exhibits marked Skates Exhibit 90 and 91. Can you just describe what those are?
Sure, these are stills of this animated map. So this shows the trip up from Monticello area to Fond du Lac, where the last ping is located. And then the second one, 91, shows the trip back down towards the Monticello area.
And I would just move to admit and publish to the jury electronically.
Any objection?
No objection.
So again, we're seeing as time passes, these calls are connecting with towers moving toward the Oshkosh area.
Yes,
And the final tower connection is in Fond du Lac at 8:05 p.m.
yes.
And on this map here, there's not 31 entries. Can you explain what you did to create this?
Sometimes the cell phone will connect with the tower more than once. If I had tried to put every single entry on here, it would be very cluttered. So I tried to just get the general direction of the pings or the connections.
Makes sense. And if I could show you State's Exhibit 91 on the screen. So is that the furthest north call, the furthest north tower communication? Where is that and what time was that connecting?
So yeah, so that is on the trip back, and that's in the Waupun area. It's at 9:06 p.m. So previous was 8:05, and then the next connection I'm able to show with the cell phone towers is 9:06.
So when we're talking about the trip there, the last connection at 8:05 in Fond du Lac, do you know approximately the distance between Fond du Lac and Oshkosh?
I had previously checked the distance between that tower and the address at 1715 Minnesota, and it was about 18.9 miles, or approximately 22 minutes, and that was for Google Maps.
And from Oshkosh to that northernmost entry there, south tower location in Waupun, do you know what the distance there?
About 30 miles.
Okay. And that's at what time?
9:06 p.m.
As part of your role, did you also review an extraction of text messages between the defendant and Rebecca going back to 2018?
I reviewed images. I'm not sure if I reviewed the text messages.
Sure. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 22 and just ask if this appears to be a printout of text messages between Rebecca and Joshua from 2018.
Okay. Yes, that's what these are.
And so that would have been a printout from the download that was done at your department.
Yes.
Going back to the call log, the defendant's call log, State's Exhibit 89. The final call there, can you indicate who the name of the party that the defendant is calling?
The final call of the entire list, number one.
Yes.
So it says Vargo 920
We don't have to list the number.
Okay.
And what time was that?
11:30.
Okay, and was that a call from Vargo to the defendant?
Yes.
And how long was that call?
That was 3 minutes and 8 seconds.
No further questions.
Ross?
Thank you. Now, just looking at exhibit number 89, since you still have that in your hand, you do, correct?
I do.
Now, that shows, and I'm gonna direct you to item number 61 on page 6. And that is from August 2nd, 2020, correct?
I'm sorry, where are you looking? On page 6?
Yeah, number 61.
Okay, sorry for that. Okay, yep, that is August 2nd.
And that's a call from Becky's cell phone to Josh, correct?
Yes,
And you can tell that connected and they talked for an hour and 10 minutes and 10 seconds, correct?
that's right.
And then we'll go to August 4th. Now, looking at number 53, number 50, and number 40. You see those three?
I do.
Those were all incoming calls that Rebecca made to Josh on August 4th, correct?
Correct.
Now, on August 4th, Rebecca called Josh at 1500 and they talked for 17 minutes and 8 seconds, correct?
Correct.
And then on the 4th later, she called Josh at 16:43 and they talked for 8 minutes and 21 seconds, correct?
16:53. It was 16:53.
I stand corrected, you're right, 16:53. And they spoke for 8 minutes and 21 seconds, correct?
Yes.
And then the last call, number 40 that I asked you to look at was a call from Rebecca to Josh on August 4th at 17:29, correct?
That's right.
And they talked for 15 minutes and 53 seconds.
Yes.
And then after that, from number 40 on, are these calls that Josh had made to Rebecca outgoing, that one unanswered that you testified about previously, correct?
I would have to take a look.
I'm not gonna ask you to read down all of them, so why don't you just take a glance? because that-
Yes, that's what it is.
And so the last time there was a communication that was answered by either party was Rebecca calling Josh on August 4th at approximately 5:30 PM, where they talked for 15 minutes and 53 seconds, correct?
Yes,
And then she stopped taking his calls, right?
that would be yourself.
And then looking at State's Exhibit number 90, the map,
Okay.
and number 91.
Yep.
Now, these all end around the Fitchburg area, correct?
South of Verona, I would say.
Somewhere a little south of Madison. Yeah, Verona, fair to say, close to Fitchburg. So you don't have this going any connections from there to Monticello?
Correct.
And would it be fair to say that on State's Exhibit number 90, at least from the Verona area, it took Josh approximately an hour and a half to get to the pin at the Fond du Lac Tower, correct?
Correct.
But on the way back, it was over 2 hours to essentially travel that same distance between the towers, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, thank you.
Anything else?
Just one question. Mr. Seaman went into 3 calls on the 4th that Rebecca had made to the defendant. Do you know total how many calls the defendant made to Rebecca that day?
42.
No further questions.
Just briefly, and again, the majority of those calls from the defendant to Rebecca were the unanswered ones after Rebecca called Josh that last time at 5:30 PM as itemized, or as presented at block number 40 on the exhibit, correct?
Yes.
Nothing further, thank you.
You may step down. Any other witnesses on behalf of the state?
No other witnesses, the state would just move in any exhibits, 1 through 91, including the thumb drive exhibit 7, A through O, and with that, the state address.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the state has rest. I think I'm gonna cut you loose now. We'll begin tomorrow morning with the events making opening statements and going into the call. Remember, you can't talk about this with anyone, watch any news reports or anything about this. Have a fantastic night. Hey, it looks beautiful outside. Hopefully it is. See you tomorrow. We'll be here 8 or upstairs 8:20 again. We'll start around 8:30. See you then.
Rise for the jury, hold the books, and keep on your chair again, thank you.
Please be seated. All right, Mr. Seaman, tonight you will go over with Mr. Aide, or after, before tomorrow morning at 8:30, over with him his rights to testify and not testify. Before I bring the jury up tomorrow morning, I'll go over that with him once again and ask him the pertinent question concerning whether or not he's going to testify, and then we'll continue with any testimony. Potential witnesses on behalf of the state, number, the defense, number how many?
Four.
So if the state has any rebuttal, we'll have it here 12:30.
We will, thank you.
And anything else we need to put on the record before we break for the rest of the day from the state's perspective?
No, Your Honor.
Defense?
No, Your Honor.
We'll see you tomorrow morning.